Welcome to a new daily top Askreddit video. Today's topic: what are some declassified government documents that are surprisingly terrifying? Project Sunshine, where the US government bought remains of dead infants to test for radiation. When they took limbs from them, the parents were never told. One mother wasn't allowed to dress her daughter for her funeral, because doctors had removed her legs, and didn't want her to find out. Is anyone else ridiculously disturbed that they named that Project Sunshine? What the fuck? The German radar guidance system Wotan was a great example on why your project/operation names should have nothing to do with their content. Jeffrey Dahmer's full confession, a couple of 100 pages of pure madness. Necrophilia, dismemberment, skinning, lobotomy, body part preservation, cannibalism. Dahmer became pretty close to his interrogating detectives, Dennis Murphy and Patrick Kennedy, and provided a lot of detail to them. A lot of it in a pretty candid, offhand manner. Dahmer should have been prosecuted for what he did in the army. Source: for capture. It began the day he and Dahmer, an army medic, were put into a room together. The assaults began at once and, eventually, he leapt from the third-floor window to escape. I had probably been raped 8 to 10 times, I don't know. He was tying me to the bunk with motor pool rope. He took all my clothing from me. He would either beat me before he raped me or he would beat me after. Jesus fucking Christ. How does that go unpunished? I will never understand how the two main movies on Dahmer barely even touched the fact that he was a cannibal/necrophiliac/butcher. Same thing with the recent Ted Bundy movie with Efron. Like really? Dude went back to his body dump sites weeks later, dug up his victims, and had sex with their corpses, and you're not going to mention that. Edit: I'm aware of the purpose of the Bundy movie. Nothing that anyone is saying is negating the fact that they could have alluded to what he did at the end of the film when it's revealed that he was in fact guilty. Instead, we end up thinking that he's just a serial killer/rapist rather than getting the full picture that he was far more disturbed than that. He truly was a monster, as the title states, and a big part of what separates him from other serial killers is that element of his WTF. Necrophilia is insane on its own, but to go dig up the bodies weeks later and then have sex with them is just, I can't even think of a word for that. The smell of a dead cat left for a few days in my neighborhood made me gag. Imagine a rotting human corpse. Could you imagine the stench? How did dude's dick not fall off after? After the My Lai massacre, killing of around 400 to 500 innocent civilians in Vietnam after an army troop killed an entire village, the U.S. government established a group to investigate other war crimes like this occurring in Vietnam, the Vietnam War Crimes Working Group. They found 28 massacres of equal or greater magnitude than My Lai that the public was unaware of, so literally thousands of innocent people killed by U.S. soldiers. The information has since been reclassified, but there were several journal articles on it when it was first released. I took a military ethics class hosted by a prof who spent many years in Vietnam as a Marine captain. He personally experienced a colonel who operated with a doctrine called count the meat. Basically, the success of an operation was dependent upon how many bodies it made. The presumption was that they were all enemies. The sad thing is that is how the Vietnam War worked. America was operating on a strategy of attempting to kill as many VC and NVA as possible, rather than to secure ground and capture territory like in previous wars. Working under the assumption that if they killed them all, there wouldn't be an insurgency anymore. Operation Midnight Climax. The government hired sex workers to dose Johns with LSD for research purposes, so to speak. https://wiki/operation_midnight_climax. Midnight Climax sounds like a porno. It basically was. Threat level midnight. Jump to the right and shake a hand. Jump to the left and you shake that hand, meet new friends, tie some yarn, that's how you do the ska. CIA involvement in starting the Guatemalan Civil War, which lasted 36 years and led to the genocide of hundreds of thousands of indigenous people. https://www.cia.gov/library/redigroom/collection/Guatemala. Whoopsie daisy. Very big whoopsie. And set up the country for the shit show that is Guatemala today. Just like Nicaragua. Guatemala is a beautiful country and the people are also beautiful, but as one taxi driver said to me, 25 families own everything in the country. Corruption is rife and the destabilization caused by the involvement of the US has been devastating for the country and its people. I watched from my hotel balcony as people came to the lake to bathe and wash their clothes. And set up the country for the shit show that is Guatemala today. Just like Nicaragua. And now we deny people asylum from the mess we created, and tell them they should stay and fix their problems at home. One US bomber accidentally dropped a nuclear bomb a short distance from a major US city, can't remember which, but luckily it didn't detonate. Off the coast of Georgia. They still haven't found it. No, they know exactly where it is. It would just be more dangerous to retrieve it than to just leave it alone. It's off the coast of Savannah. There was also the Broken Arrow near Goldsboro, NC 2 bombs dropped, one never recovered. Wiki 1961 Broken Arrow near Goldsboro, NC. This is the one where on the bomb they recovered only a single quite delicate safety device stopped it from detonating. If the other is in a similar state, there's a non-zero possibility it could still detonate someday. My hometown was littered with radioactive waste by the federal government as part of the Manhattan Project. https www.nytimes.com/1981/02/01/Irregio. Then we wonder why cancer and thyroid conditions there are the norm. I grew up 2 miles from the Lake Ontario Ordnance Works site, and my dad grew up on 89th Street in Niagara Falls in the 40s. He says that he remembers sitting on the train tracks as a kid watching the hooker chemical trucks bring in 55-gallon drums to the Love Canal. That whole area was contaminated with all sorts of nasty stuff. So what did they do? They bulldozed it over and built houses on it, of course. Then in the 70s, when people were noticing toxic sludge in their basements, kids' feet were being literally burned by the high levels of phosphorus in the ground, and people were getting sick, they acted like they knew nothing. Eventually people sued and the whole area was evacuated. They tried to clean it up, but they basically put tons of dirt and clay over the area as a cap, and it's all fenced off. You can see it when you drive east on the Niagara Falls Expressway to Towada. For the Wistow storage site, also known as the NFSS Niagara Falls storage site, I've read documents where they had hazardous storage barrels sitting exposed to the elements, with seepage and all that. Again, they've covered everything with clay to stop it, but it's already in the ground. The bad thing is that there's a large elementary and high school, Wistow Porter, about 2 miles from the site, which is actually on property that used to be part of the site but was never used and was sold to the county. Needless to say, the cancer rate among long-term staff and teachers is higher than average. I'm glad to have finally moved away. The Department of Health and Human Services practiced female sterilization on Native American women all the way through the 1970s. Kinda sobering knowing that we were using tax dollars to suppress indigenous birth rates less than 50 years ago. https://m.wikipedia.org/wiki. I think even recently in Manitoba there's been reports of hospital staff telling local indigenous women who'd just given birth that they aren't allowed to see their babies unless they consent to sterilization. First Nations are still incredibly vulnerable, and the West is still feeling aftershocks of genocide. It happened in 2018. This was so prevalent that between 25 to 50% of Native women were sterilized against their will, and their birth rate dropped by 3/4 following this time. Black and poor women too. I remember reading a story about a 12-year-old black girl in the South in the 60s going to the doctor for an appendectomy and leaving sterilized without being told. Many didn't find out for years, until they realized they should have gotten their period by now or were having trouble conceiving. https://cbhd.org/content. https://m.wikipedia.org/wiki. Not long ago yet we still have certain groups of people shocked and confused by the distrust and disdain many people of color have towards the US government. There are over 50 mishaps with nuclear weapons by the US Air Force in the 1950s alone. Removed. My grandparents were downwinders and both died from cancer. My dad is also a downwinder and more than 60% of his high school senior class has died from cancer. He gets 2 screenings a year for cancer. https://m.wikipedia.org/wiki/downwinders. CIA invested millions in trying to make cat spies. $20 million to be precise. I do, the way my friend's cat is staring at me right now, maybe they succeeded. Know why it didn't work? Test #1, their very first spy cat ever ran into the street and was hit by a car. They decided to not continue. Bro, that's what they want you to think. Everyone knows cats have 9 lives. He faked his own death and is now in deep with his next assignment. It was the perfect plan. In East Germany, a committed freedom fighter and her husband had dealt with having her home raided while she was away, being arrested on the way to protests and all sorts of state-sponsored harassment. After the wall fell, she was able to read the documents the Stasi had kept on her and found out her own husband was an undercover agent and had written many reports on her activities with a bloodless banality. Suspiciously, she always has a headache when I propose having sex. Possible capitalist plot. She's always volunteering to take the children to school on Mondays. Possibility of capitalist indoctrination of our children. Must interrogate them later. British Metropolitan Police Services have done exactly the same on ecological protesters from organisations like Greenpeace. There was literally a case a few years back, like 5 years ago, an undercover cop I believe married, and even had kids with a protester he was investigating the whole way through. And then he didn't have to pay child support cause he was on the job, and our government said they weren't liable either. Fucking joke.